Hello, everybody. Welcome to MEERtalk. My name is Kaeza, your host for today. We are so glad to be getting together for another MEERtalk. Today, we're going to hear from Mike Tidwell, and then we'll take questions from a few people in the MEER community. After that, we're going to open it up for questions from all of you in our live audience. In case you didn't see, in our recent newsletter, MEER is exploring a potential collaboration with Gambia Rising, an inspiring nonprofit organization dedicated to improving education in rural Gambia. Gambia Rising has been working on constructing schools and teachers' housing in underserved areas where access to quality education is limited. And we believe there may be an opportunity for collaboration that could significantly improve learning environments. In order to carry out all projects like this that are crucial for MEER's further development, we do rely on donations. If you don't already donate and would like to contribute, you can do that at meer.org/donate. And we so appreciate your donations. You can also write to info@meer.org to be in touch. Okay, now let me tell you about today's guest speaker. Mike Tidwell is the founder and director of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network and a grassroots climate activist with nearly 25 years of experience in advancing clean energy solutions in the Mid-Atlantic and on Capitol Hill. His work has evolved from championing renewable energy policy to exploring solar reflection methods driven by both the slow pace of the energy transition and the alarming rise in global temperatures. His latest book, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, documents this personal shift and the unfolding impacts of climate change in his own Maryland neighborhood. If anybody has any questions that come up while Mike is presenting, you can send them along to co-host Kathy in the chat. Okay, Mike, well, we're so glad you could be with us today, and we're eager to know what it is you have to share. So take it away.
Yeah, well, thank you. I really appreciate y'all having me today. It is unfortunate that, the topic that we have to discuss, sort of the emergency crisis is facing this planet, is bringing us together today. But nonetheless, I think there's a lot of interesting things happening in terms of responses to the runaway climate change that we're seeing. As was mentioned, I just published a book called The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, a story of climate and hope on one American street. I spent 20 years as a climate activist, really focused on state and federal legislation, mandating wind and solar power, incentivizing energy efficient homes, fighting the fossil fuel industry, banning fracking in Maryland, stopping the Atlantic Coast Pipeline in Virginia. These are all things that I participated in over the last 20-something years. I've been peacefully arrested, engaging in creative civil disobedience at least a dozen times. So I'm all in when it comes to the climate movement. I'm all in when it comes to fighting fossil fuel polluters and fighting for climate justice. But something unsettling happened to me in the fall of 2022 after I had worked so hard with so many other groups to pass the Inflation Reduction Act, which passed in August of 2022. We had an amazing signing ceremony at the Rose Garden where I was invited to be there in September of 2022. And after 20 years of trying to reach that day of passing transformative federal legislation, after working on state bills and county bills and city municipal standards on clean energy, et cetera, I should have been happy. I should have been really happy. But instead, I became quite melancholy because after the Inflation Reduction Act was signed into law in September 2022, I collapsed from exhaustion in my backyard, decided to take 2 weeks off to just recover from 20 years of nonstop campaigning. And it was only then when I finally paused after all that advocacy, after all those campaigns, that I finally looked up and came out of a kind of state of denial that my neighborhood itself was being completely transformed by climate change. My old trolley suburb of Washington, D.C., Tacoma Park, Maryland, population of 18,000 people. The District of Columbia begins literally at the end of my block. I live in a home that's 115 years old. And in the fall of 2022, I realized first and foremost that so many of our trees were dying. Our biggest trees, primarily our oak trees, 100 years old and older. My neighborhood, my city of Tacoma Park is obsessed with trees. We call ourselves Tree City, USA. So many of our streets in my neighborhood are named after trees: Willow, dogwood, pine, spruce. These are maple. These are the names of the streets in my neighborhood. And yet we had seen mass mortality of especially oak trees, which are ecologically the most important in any forest, urban or rural. And that's when I decided that, I had been hearing fragments of information from the city newsletter and from arborists I would meet on the street that it was extreme weather, it was, strange temperatures and rainfall, and that it was basically climate change. And in fall of 2022, I decided that I wanted to figure out exactly how was climate change killing our trees. And so in my book, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, I describe how from 2019 to 2022, on my one block, we lost 500 years of growth of oak trees. And we've lost even more than that since. And this this mass mortality of trees, not just in Tacoma Park, but throughout the Mid-Atlantic, was triggered by fantastic record rainfall in 2018. All the Mid-Atlantic states set records for annual rainfall that still stand today. And that moisture, the jet stream dipped in a highly, highly unusual climate-driven way. The jet stream in 2018 dipped all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico several times, brought multiple atmospheric rivers to the Mid-Atlantic, soaked the soil for so long throughout 2018 that it triggered a mold in the soil called Phytophthora, which translates from Greek to plant destroyer. And that mold just exploded, unbeknownst to us, all under the ground, everywhere, including on my block in Tacoma Park, causing trees to be damaged, stressed out, and finally succumbing to ambrosia beetles. That was a mass mortality that happened throughout the Mid-Atlantic. And my neighborhood, we have lost 45 acres of tree canopy just since 2019. 45 acres of canopy have disappeared. Between mid-2019 and mid-2021, we lost 12,000 trees in my neighborhood, most of them just spatial giants, really, really big oak trees. Trees are like people. The younger ones can handle a lot more stress and are more durable. The older ones, not so much. And I remember in the fall of 2022, an arborist telling me something that haunted me and made me decide I wanted to write a book that tells the story of climate change through the trees in my neighborhood. He said that, Mike, our native trees are no longer native. We've changed the climate, so they're foreigners. Our native trees are foreigners all around us, and we should not be surprised that they're getting sick and they're dying. And I was just so haunted by that because, of course, if our trees are foreigners on this planet, what does that make us? We human beings are becoming foreigners in the same civilization that evolved over the last 10,000 years of a stable climate, and there are gross implications for us. So I decided that I was going to write a book about trees and climate change, and to make the point that it's also not just trees, because as I began to probe and really examine the plausible impacts of climate change in my neighborhood and on my block, I discovered a lot more things going on. One, I realized I wasn't the only one struggling with chronic Lyme disease. I was bit by a tick more than 10 years ago. I was misdiagnosed for years. I now, we've all heard of long COVID. Well, there's long Lyme disease. So I have recurring inflammation. I manage it with antibiotics and acupuncture. But I then discovered that 3 other people on my block had suffered from Lyme. 6 members of my church have had Lyme. Just recently, a Eagle Scout in the local Boy Scout troop in my neighborhood spent 2 years bedridden from Lyme disease. And of course, our milder winters are killing off fewer ticks. Lyme disease is the spread of it is directly linked to climate change. The EPA uses Lyme disease as one of its key indicators of the intensification of climate change. So trees dying, Lyme disease, but also then flooding. We've just had fantastic flooding in my neighborhood in recent years. So much so that in 2020, we got a storm. We got 5 inches of rain in 1 hour that just flooded so many homes. It flooded my church preschool, which is just a block from my house. And we had these compounding impacts of climate change because on Willow Avenue, we've lost so many trees. And of course, trees are your #1 defense against flooding. The roots of trees absorb the rain, the canopy's friction slows down the rainfall as it descends. But as these trees were dying on my block and the slope moved toward my church on Tulip Avenue, a block away, that extreme rainfall from climate change then was compounded by climate destroyed trees being gone, and my church flooded. And the church was completely freaked out, as you can imagine, when a preschool floods, where there are children between 6 months old and 12 years old. The church insisted that the city do something about it, and the city of Tacoma Park said, "We're broke. We have flooding everywhere. We spent $500,000 just alleviating flood in the neighborhood." So they said, "We have some sidewalk money," and in a fantastic episode of climate adaptation, the city of Tacoma Park busted up a perfectly good sidewalk running half a block right outside my church, brought in 30 tons of soil, elevated the sidewalk 14 inches, repaved it, and effectively created a flood berm, costing the taxpayers $45,000. This is going on throughout my neighborhood, this chewing gum and baling wire response to flooding, people suffering from Lyme disease, trees dying. So I was like, my book, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, is the first of its kind. I mean, and it basically makes the case that climate change has gotten so bad that you can throw a dart at a spinning globe, and wherever that dart lands on the planet, whether it's downtown Tokyo or, the highlands of Ethiopia or the 7100 block of Willow Avenue, where I live in Tacoma Park, you can write a whole book about the impacts of climate change in that one little microdot. And I know that because I've done it. But the subtitle of my book is, it's The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, a story of climate and hope on one American street. And the hope part is there. I write about that at the same time that we've seen the passing of trees in my neighborhood, we've seen the coming of clean energy. Yeah, I live in a particularly progressive neighborhood, but still solar is just spreading so significantly all over the world, as the great Bill McKibben, author and activist, in his new book, Here Comes the Sun, is reminding us that solar is much more revolutionary and disruptive as an energy source than most of us really appreciate. And we need to demand more of it, especially at the local and state level, given what's happening at the federal level. There's tons of solar in my neighborhood. There are a ton of electric cars. The first gas station in America to switch entirely from filling cars with gas to charging them with electricity is in my neighborhood, RS Automotive. And we hear constantly in my neighborhood, electric cars going up and down the street, making that sound my neighbor Paula calls the faint harmony of angels that we hear all the time from electric cars. So that's happening. And also, as a form of adaptation, in my neighborhood, when a big tree dies, as they continue to do, one of two things happen. Either solar panels go up on that pitched roof of a house or flat roof of a commercial establishment, or gardens happen. More and more people are growing food in my neighborhood because there's more sunlight to do so. So I write about all of these things in a pretty dramatic narrative. A lot of people read the book and told me, Mike, I thought it was going to be boring. Like, why do I want to read about your shrubs drying up on your blog? But it's an incredible story of human struggle and adaptation. But it's also much more than that. You know, I start with the microscopic block level, and I make the argument that climate change is really bad when you can write a book like this. And what are we going to do about it? You all know that the IPCC and other scientists tell us we are in carbon overshoot. The only safe level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is 350 parts per million. We're at 425. We are in overshoot, and clean energy alone will not save us. Solar power alone will not save us. The clean energy revolution is unstoppable. Every day around the world, human beings deploy a gigawatt of solar every single day, the equivalent of a large nuclear power plant. Half the cars sold in the world's largest automobile market in the world, China, will be electric this year. This is unstoppable, but we started too late. And so the IPCC says we need negative emissions, right? We need to not only stop emitting fossil carbon dioxide, we need to suck a lot of that CO2 already in the atmosphere out of the atmosphere and store it underground or in the oceans. And that technology is in its infancy. One of the people I write about in my book is one of my neighbors, Dr. Ning Zhang, a professor at the University of Maryland, who is obsessed with this idea, and the science backs him up, that as all of these trees die, not only in my neighborhood in the mid-Atlantic, but, you know, the iconic cedars of Lebanon are burning down. The iconic stone pines of Rome are dying from climate-related insect infestation. The bristlecone pines of Utah are dying of thirst. And Ning Zhang argues that unless we do something, those trees are just going to decompose. They're going to vent their centuries of CO2 back in the atmosphere, compounding the problem. So his idea is we should bury these trees as they fall. We should lock their carbon into the ground, bury them in low clay soil, and you know, he calls it reverse coal. You know, we still today, Europeans find pristine Viking ships, you know, preserved in the mud of river estuaries for 1,000 years, and we could do the same with trees buried in low oxygen soil, according to Ning Zhang. So I follow him in this version of negative emissions as he tries to bury his first 100 tons of trees in 2023 and is successful in doing that. And we have a funeral for these trees that are buried on farmland north of Baltimore. And Ning reads a poem. We have a moment of silence. And so I write about that. But that technology, you know, it's hard to imagine that's really going to scale up. It could be a small part of negative emissions, but overall, that technology, whether it's giant machines with fans and filters to suck CO2 out or weatherizing rocks, still, you know, the technology is today is where like solar was in the 1970s. And meanwhile, climate change right now is so bad that my neighborhood is being transformed. So we need to do, if clean energy alone can't save us and negative emissions technology isn't ready, close to being ready, then what are our options? We could just try to adapt, you know, to a 3C world, which is, we can't adapt to that. So if you rule adaptation as a plausible response and clean energy is not getting us there fast enough and negative emissions aren't ready, you inevitably wind up with this idea of reflecting sunlight away from the planet, which I do in my book. You know, I'm a hard-charging left-of-center grassroots activist. And I've been doing this for 25 years. Most people are surprised when I make the argument, as I do in my book, that we have to seriously look at research into solar reflection methods, solar radiation modification, whatever you want to call it. I talk about Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines, you know, erupting in 1991, cooling the planet by a degree Fahrenheit for more than a year. You know, I go into David Keith's arguments and those of others. I visit NASA here in the DC area. I go to the roof of Building 33, where there are, you know, robots basically 24/7 measuring aerosols in the atmosphere and they're all over the world, and NASA maintains that data, and you can see the cooling effect of smoke all over the world from wildfires burning. You can see the cooling effect of fossil fuel pollution. You can see the effects of clouds. You can see the effects of dust from the Sahara. We monitor these things. We know a lot about aerosols, and I interview a lot of scientists, some who believe that we should be studying it, and some who believe that we should be deploying it, and others who think we shouldn't be studying it and we should never deploy it, and don't even want to talk about it. And so I survey and represent as best I can all of those arguments in my book, while personally coming down on the side of we have to study this, we have to research it, we need to test it, because I, for one, don't want to burn up on a runaway climate change planet. Hopefully, we'll never have to deploy. My organization, Chesapeake Climate Action Network, we officially support research. More and more groups are coming around to that. But it has to be done the right way. We have to have, we have a lot of work to do before we could ever even think about deployment. But I sort of look at this issue the way the Biden administration's guidance on SRM research in late June of 2023, the White House Office of Science and Technology came out with a paper, a short 45-page paper that gave guidance to research and testing. And they basically make a very smart point. They say, is geoengineering risky? Are there serious risks involved? Absolutely, there are. But risky compared to what? Compared to runaway climate change? Compared to 500 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere? And we have to approach this issue with a risk versus risk management approach. We can't just say one is risky without context and therefore walk away. We have to answer the question, risky compared to what? So I get into all these issues. I go from the most microscopic level of climate change that you can imagine, which is my own front yard, to being on the roof of Building 33 at NASA in Greenbelt, Maryland, just a few miles from my house, talking to some top climate scientists about this issue of reflecting sunlight. So that is the book in a nutshell. I do think of it, honestly, as a book more than anything that broaches the issue of geoengineering in the sort of grassroots climate community. It is the first book not written by a scientist, not written by an academic or a diplomat broaching the issue. It is the first time that a hard-charging U.S. climate leader has basically said, we have to look at this. We have to look at this seriously. Interestingly, I've gotten very little criticism for it. I thought that my organization would be criticized. I thought that the book would be controversial for my editor. My editor at St. Martin's, I kept waiting for him to say, you need to tone down this crazy, you go from your one block to geoengineering. That's just too much. That's a bridge too far. And he never did. He loved it. It was his favorite part of the book. So if you are interested in a clearly argued, narrative-driven, personality-driven story that makes the case for geoengineering research, I recommend that you check out the book. It's available on Audible, and you can find the book wherever books are sold. I will put a link in the chat where if you're interested in ordering a book with all proceeds going to my organization, not to me, but to my organization, Chesapeake Climate Action Network, you can get a signed copy mailed to you. So with that, I would love to take some questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mike. And yeah, thank you for those links. We are going to bring on a few people from the MEER community. And first, I just want to remind everybody that you can send your questions to Kathy, co-host, in the chat, while I have Herb Simmons come on and a few others. Herb Simmons is a longtime climate leader. He has co-founded 3 climate action groups and is the author of a climate vocabulary of the future, which has been called a science poem and a prophecy by the noted author Kim Stanley Robinson. He serves on the steering circle of the Healthy Planet Action Coalition, an international group committed to restoring a safe and healthy climate. Additionally, he is a board member and serves as an event moderator for the Climate Emergency Forum. And we're so glad you could be with us. And just a reminder, everybody, there is a wonderful MEERtalk that Herb gave about the new climate vocabulary, the vocabulary of the future. So yes, go ahead, Herb. Good to have you here.
Well, thank you so much, Kaiza. And thanks to the MEER community and you all for giving me the honor of participating and moderating the sessions that we had in London at London Climate Week in June with Ye and with the incredible economist Steve Keen. That was quite an experience. And speaking of climate weeks, the New York Climate Week is coming up in a couple weeks. And the Healthy Climate Initiative, which is a sister organization of MEER and Healthy Planet Action Coalition, they're putting together a program, and happy to say that Mike will be participating. That's Monday, September 22nd. And CCAN, Mike's organization, is also organizing a panel program at Climate Week on Wednesday of that week. So I would encourage all of you who are near or can get to New York to come to both of those sessions. And thank you, Mike, for all the work you've done. I live not far from Mike, and I followed CCAN and worked with you all from time to time over the years. And there are few leaders in climate anywhere that, as Mike said, have the dedication and the outcomes that Mike listed. And I hope you continue to get enough rest so that you can continue in all this important work. So I have two questions. One is on reflection, solar reflection, or what we at the Healthy Planet Action Coalition call direct climate cooling. So I would, if you had interviewed me or one of the people in our organization, we would be on the spectrum that was focused on the need for deployment. And I guess the question I would ask for you is why, it seems to me that the argument is a very weak argument for not deploying it. That the strong argument is to say, as long as that there are no fatal flaws in whatever portfolio of approaches, including the approach that MEER is taking and SAI, stratospheric aerosol injection. I mean, given the facts, as you've said, given that we're 75 parts per million over where we are, we're 1.5 degrees C. And maybe most importantly, and at least in my experience, I don't know if you found this, Mike, that very few people are aware that even when we get, I won't say if, I'll be optimistic, when we get to net zero by mid-century or so, temperatures will remain wherever they are then, they'll remain at that level, give or take, for literally centuries. Sea level rise will continue. And that's not a future any of us would want to live in or should have to live in. So I guess my question to you to challenge you a little bit is, instead of just saying we need to look into research, it seems to me, yes, the research is necessary to determine whether it's safe and effective. But what's the argument for assuming that there may be a scenario where we wouldn't have to deploy it?
Well, I think it's the last thing we want to do. Right? I don't think you inject sulfur or some other aerosol into the atmosphere using airplanes or balloons or hoses or whatever for decades, requiring serious global cooperation among nations that just don't get along. I think that's got to be your last option. And you don't do it until you've socialized the issue among all the nations of the world. You've done tons and tons of work of trying to establish trust in a process and a form of cooperation among all the countries of the world. How is it going to be done? Who's going to make decisions? How are decisions going to be made? Who's going to pay for it? What liability fund is going to be created for countries who claim that they've been harmed by this? Just a ton of work has to go into this before deployment, of course. With an eye toward justice among the people being harmed the most by global warming right now in the global south. So, and then while that's happening, you know, one would hope there's some kind of negative emissions, direct carbon removal breakthrough technology, whether, you know, we can make weatherizing basalt rock easy and economical. You know, I don't know, probably not, but you can't rule it out. You know, I think about, and maybe this isn't the perfect analogy, but it was you know, in the late 1990s, many of us were arguing that we were about to hit peak oil, right? And then the fracking revolution turned that completely upside down. You know, maybe there could be something that could help us remove carbon from the atmosphere so that we don't have to reflect sunlight. So I just think it's premature to say there's no strong argument against deployment. I think there is. There's arguments of caution. There's arguments of fingers crossed we don't have to do it. But in the meantime, we have to study this, and we have to do outdoor testing, and we have to rule out the truly crazy stuff. And we have to build trust among the world's nations.
That's a fair response, and I won't take any more time on that except to say that I suspect that you and I will continue to have this conversation in New York in a couple of weeks in front of another group of people. But my second question, I want to bring us back to Earth, if you will, away from sunlight, and that is putting your climate activist hat on, and given, you know, what hasn't been talked about today, but I'm sure is in the back or the front of all of our minds, particularly those in the United States, is of course the decimation of climate action by our current administration. And, you know, because you're sort of in the middle of the national nerve center and all that, what can you say about what you're witnessing? And more importantly, you know, is there an emerging strategy by the climate activist community to, you know, try to, you know, minimize or curtail what's happening every day?
Yeah, I mean, look, Trump can eviscerate the EPA and the Department of Energy and all the things that he's doing. He can shut down wind farms that aren't completed yet. He can do his worst, but he can't stop what's happening outside this country. You know, China is becoming the first electro state. You know, a country that's promoting the electrification of cars, the electrification of buildings, and helping other countries, especially in the developing world, but around the world. I mean, I was just in Mexico City, where BYD Chinese cars were very, you know, were visible, trucks and cars, and advertising for BYD, you know, bring your dreams, BYD Chinese cars. This is the future. China is going to take market share. Detroit will probably never recover from Donald Trump's de-emphasizing electric cars, although Detroit continues to build electric cars, and they know it's coming. And so I think that, you know, Trump can't stop what's happening outside this country. He also can't fully stop what's happening in the blue states. You know, California has deployed so much solar and utility scale battery just in the last 2 years that gas combustion related to power generation has gone down 40% in the last 2 years in the fifth largest economy in the world. Trump can't stop that. Texas is deploying wind and solar, et cetera, et cetera. So the activism will continue. I mean, we're going to have balcony solar legislation in Maryland and Virginia and DC in the next 6 months to facilitate the ability of people in this region where I live to do what's already happening in Germany, and it's happening in Utah, where people can affix a solar panel on their balconies pointed toward the sun and just simply plug it into their house. And then we'll continue to fight fossil fuel expansions, try to slow the switch to data centers and insist that they are powered by renewable energy without slowing down any state climate goals. So there's a lot of activism still happening, even as we grieve over the the colossal waste of stopping wind farms that are 3/4 built in places like Rhode Island. And we see the, I couldn't help but notice that this giant ice raid, the largest one of this administration, was at an electric car factory in Georgia. So the Republicans get a twofer. There's just a lot to be alarmed about, but it can't be stopped. The clean energy revolution can't be stopped.
Thanks, Mike.
All right. Thank you so much, Herb. Next, we're going to bring on Joe Howd. Joe Howd is the president of the North County San Diego Climate Change Alliance, also chair of the executive committee for North County Group of Sierra Club, and a member of the Orange County United Nations Association, working to help the UN implement the SDGs. So thanks for being with us, Joe, and you can go ahead.
Thank you, Kaisa, and thank you everyone, for asking us to participate. I had an observation from the perspective of local action. In San Diego County, we have 19 political entities. 18 of them have climate action plans. We have been working diligently to strengthen each climate action plan and related follow-on from the cities and so forth. And we've trying to define what we think is an optimum climate action plan in the context of local activism here. I also have two questions. The first is directly related to what you've been talking about, Mike. James Hansen points out that moving to low sulfur fuel for oceanic shipping has increased the rate of warming on the planet because we lose reflectivity. On the other hand, somewhere north of 7 million people seem to be dying prematurely every year from aerosol pollution caused in part by this sulfur fuel that we're moving away from. How do we balance those two? Should we return to high sulfur fuel to increase the reflectivity?
No, of course not. Yes, I mean, I write about this in my book. I talk about how, we've been masking part of the warming through the aerosols released in our fossil fuel combustion. And now we're getting bonus warming, even as we get off fossil fuels, which is a problem. But I think that we have to continue to clean up the fuel we use in shipping and every other aspects of our lives, do it as fast as we can, while working on all the other aspects of climate activism, trying to accelerate carbon direct removal from the atmosphere and researching solar reflection methods. But I don't think anyone's going to argue, let's reintroduce high sulfur combustible fuels.
Okay, thank you. I'm convinced we need far more than adaptation. The energy required to remove carbon from the atmosphere seems to create more of a problem than it solves. So how would you rank issues of clean energy, building efficiency and electrification, nature-based solutions, and dealing with too much, too little, and polluted water? What are the really most important actions that aren't just adaptation, but specific programs that we could implement locally and globally? What are the key ones for you?
In terms of adaptation, I mean, you know, I do find it interesting that there are some anti-SRM folks out there who say they're so anti, they say we shouldn't even talk about it. And I remember 15 years ago in the climate movement, and I was one of them, like, why are we talking about adaptation? That just is an excuse for the oil industry to continue to pollute. You know, we'll get to adaptation down the road, but our number one goal should be to prevent the worst impacts of climate change from happening so we don't have a massive adaptation problem. Well, you know, obviously we have to talk about it now because we do have a massive adaptation problem. We've waited too long to make the switch to clean energy. So we do have to pay attention. I can only speak for my region. There are a lot of things that I write about in my book that my neighborhood can adapt to a lot of things. We can plant more trees as they die. We can put up solar. We can protect ourselves from ticks. We can, God willing, have a vaccine out soon if RFK Jr. doesn't kill it on Lyme disease. But the one thing that we cannot adapt to is the amount of water that's falling on our neighborhood. It's just, there's not enough money to build the drainage systems and the flood walls needed. But there are other forms of adaptation that we have to do. Air conditioning for schools that are under air conditioned, trying to build enough levees and elevated streets to minimize the flooding. Again, a Lyme disease vaccine. So there are a lot of things that we can invest in, but ultimately we cannot adapt to climate change. We can't adapt to not only the amount of warming that we're now projected to get, like well past 2, 2.5, maybe 3, can't adapt to that, and the speed that it's happening. One of the arguments I make in the book is starting in June 2023 to the present, we have been warming at such a higher rate than we've ever seen before, higher than the scientists predicted, setting records by record amounts each month. It's just, you know, it's going like this. And that is a scenario we just can't, not in the current civilization that we have. So we've got to look at, you know, accelerating clean energy, figuring out how to capture carbon out of the air, and studying this idea of reflecting sunlight.
Okay, well, thanks, Mike. I think we understate the urgency with respect to water issues, not just floods. We had tens of thousands of people in San Diego County displaced by atmospheric rivers recently. So yes, that's obviously a core issue. But another side of that is the huge drought that we have, and that is increasing, you know, profoundly. And then all the pollution, you know, eutrophication and dead zones in our water bodies, et cetera. I don't think we're taking all the actions we need to protect our water, our fresh water.
Okay, well, thank you, Joe. And yes, that is a good point about water. Next, we're going to bring on Ariana Iupi. Ariana Iupi is a project officer at MEER. She graduated from Columbia University with a master's degree in climate and society, where she studied environmental and climate science and how climate change impacts communities. All right, go ahead, Ariana.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike, for your presentation. It was really interesting. And I'm also looking forward to coming to the event for New York City Climate Week too. And my question here is, what's your outlook on where U.S. climate policy is headed within the next decade?
Well, again, the policies of blue states across the country constitute a big part of U.S. climate policy. I know that those of us who were at the last conference of the parties in Baku last fall and upcoming COPs under Donald Trump, I guarantee you there are going to be a lot of Americans like me and other American groups begging the rest of the world to go on without us at the international level. I think that it's actually a positive thing that the Trump administration won't even be present at these COPs. They won't send a serious delegation, so they won't be there to do the bidding of ExxonMobil and slowing things down and destroying and watering down possible treaty agreements. So, you know, the blue states will continue a push for clean energy. You know, just the market forces, the how inexpensive solar is getting, the durability of electric cars. I mean, I've had a Hyundai Ioniq 5 since March of 2022. There's nothing to break. There's so few moving parts. We've saved $1,800 just on oil changes. It's just amazing, and I think that logic and that efficiency and durability is and falling prices. It's just people are going to choose one thing 10 years from now when they go to the car lot, and that's going to be electric. So I think these are all going to go forward. You know, hopefully, you know, we're going to have a return of an administration in 2028 that, you know, doesn't lie and doesn't live in a fantasy world. Bill McKibben said on Chris Hayes' podcast the other day that Trump's vision is to turn the United States into like an island petrostate that would be sort of like Williamsburg, Virginia, the way energy was used in the old-timey days, where we'll still be driving dirty cars and dirty factories, whereas the rest of the world will have moved on to electrification. So hopefully in 2028, starting in January 2029, we'll have an administration that pivots pretty quickly. If you look at what Joe Biden and the Democrats did with slim majorities after 4 years of destruction from Trump the first time, it's pretty amazing the progress they made. Now, a lot of that is being dismantled, but a lot happened after the Inflation Reduction Act was passed. A lot of manufacturing investments were made, a lot of socializing the idea of electrifying buildings and cars took hold. It can't be erased. So look, we're behind. The United States is a problem for the rest of the world, but we can catch back up with enough political will. And so I'm hoping that our leadership on climate returns in 2029, building on the work that the blue states are going to do between now and 2029.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you, Ariana. So now we're going to go ahead and hear from your questions. Here are some from you. And I have a question for, well, just also a reminder that anybody else who hasn't submitted a question, you can send that to Kathy in the chat. So first, let's ask this from Jonathan. Jonathan says, when I decided to change my career in 2014 to climate solutions engineer, it followed from two realizations that I grieved for and then accepted. Most species of trees are now in the wrong climate zone for their survival, and that nearly every shovelful of old ice on the planet is going to melt within decades. How have you come to accept and keep enough optimism to work hard in the face of powerful realizations that you've learned in your studies?
Oh, well, thanks for the softball question. Great question. I feel your grief. I feel your frustration and fear in that question. You know, I have a 28-year-old son, and he was 5 years old when I founded my group, the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, to take on this issue full time. You know, a lot has happened in those 23 years, but both good and bad. I think the fact that I get out of bed every morning and keep doing this work means I'm still hopeful. I still think that there's, we have a chance. When my son was like 13 years old, he, was becoming really aware, and he was learning about climate change at school, and he would hear me talking to journalists without any filters in a way that I probably shouldn't have been with a young person in the room. And one time I got off the phone with a journalist, and he just asked me, are we all going to die? We all going to die. And I remember thinking, oh my God, like what, how can I talk to him in a way that he'll get it? And he was obsessed with sports. And I thought I got to have a sports analogy. And then I said, Sasha, it's bad. I admit it's bad right now, but think about it in terms of football. Has there ever been a football team at the high school, college, NFL level that was down by 3 touchdowns with no timeouts with only 2 minutes to play? And he's like, yeah, sure, probably. And I said, exactly. And how would a team come back that far down? It would take one, amazing teamwork, and amazing leaders, great quarterback, and probably a little bit of luck. And I think that looking forward, that's what we're going to need. We're going to need for all the nations of the world, or at least an important coalition of the willing to work together. And they'll work together if we have some really inspiring leaders that lead us toward solutions. But we've reached a point where we're probably going to need some luck. Hopefully the climate ball bounces our way somehow. The climate responds faster than we thought to direct removal of carbon. We are able to decarbonize the economy and hit net zero before 2050. I don't know. So that's sort of how I look at it. I look at it like it's bleak, but we got to keep going. And my final line of defense that I heard from a friend of mine in South Louisiana who's been fighting to save wetlands there forever, a Cajun friend of mine. I mean, he's literally been advocating for wetland preservation for 30 years. And every year, every hour, Louisiana loses like a football field of land to sea level rise. And I said, Wendell, how do you do it? How do you get up every morning and give that next church basement talk and write that letter to the editor? And he said, Mike, a drowning man never stops kicking his legs. So on my worst day, that's all I got. We're not going to stop kicking our legs.
Yeah, that's a stark metaphor. So I have a little something from Isabel. It's more practical. We'll go from the grand to the more practical. Isabel says, I live in Virginia in the DC area, and I have also lost oak trees. I have planted new ones, 20-year-old and growth acorns or grown acorns. But should I plant something else if these are no longer really native? What trees should we plant in this area?
Well, I think especially if you live in this region, I encourage you to check out my book, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue. Again, it's on Audible, or you can find it wherever books are sold, or click on the link in the chat. In my book, I talk about the fact that the arborist in Tacoma Park now recommends that he doesn't discourage people from planting previously common white oaks, which the white oak is the official state tree of Maryland. It is a tree that previously grew abundantly, grew healthy. White oaks could grow to be 100 to 300 years old in this state, and they have been decimated the most by the extreme weather we've seen in recent years, by the wet soil, the Phytophthora mold, and ambrosia beetles. So in my neighborhood, Tacoma Park, the arborist encourages people, instead of planting traditional white oaks, to plant swamp white oaks, literally named because of its ability to survive in really wet conditions, swamp white oaks. So my wife and I planted a swamp white oak in our front yard which is doing well, and you just see more and more of those planted. Post oaks, there's a 150-year-old post oak in my neighborhood. Post oaks are adapted to do well in super dry conditions and in super wet conditions. They originate from the Great Plains, and so they're less common in this region. But I know more and more people are planting post oaks. That's adaptation. It's unclear whether even those trees though can survive just in the DC area, June and July were the most, we had the highest humidity we'd ever had. Just staggeringly high humidity and tons of rain. Followed by what? The driest August in 150 years of record keeping. So we went from wet, humid, damp, dank to Arizona weather. And that puts tremendous stress on trees. So it's unclear that even these trees, swamp oaks, bald cypresses are being planted more and more in my neighborhood. It's just unclear whether we can only adapt to so much, but those are the species I would look at.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Peter is asking a question. He says, your book touches on geoengineering as a controversial but necessary research area. Do you think small-scale, community-embedded sunlight reflection projects could offer a more democratic, less risky complement to large-scale proposals?
Interesting question. I know that there are efforts to try to achieve regional solar reflection in places like the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. Maybe you could do that over Greenland and the Arctic. But like community-based, like little town by little town, I just don't know how that would work. Just if you're a town of 18,000 people, even if you put a giant umbrella over the town, the mixing of air all around you it's unlikely that you're going to get the same kind of cooling that you need. But I don't know. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Here's another question from Jonathan. Nature has a way of correcting the forests that are in the wrong climate zones, fire and disease, for example. Do you think it is effective to resist these natural processes, or should we work with them to clear the land and help introduce new and better surviving species?
I'm not qualified. To answer. In the introduction to my book, I explain how many trees we've lost on my block, and we grieve these trees. Many of them still, their tree stumps are still here. They're like tombstones. It's like we live in a cemetery. And one arborist told me, Mike, when a tree dies in a forest, it's just one of thousands. When it dies in your backyard, it's a friend, it's a family member. So we are surrounded by the remains of these giant friends that we had, and we live with grief. And then in the introduction of my book, I said, there's still some big trees in my neighborhood. There's still some big trees on my block, oak trees, but they're fewer every year. And if these trees had legs, they would run away. They would head north, maybe 300 miles to Western New York or Southern Canada, where the temperature there today is more like what they were born into 70, 80, 90 years ago. They could, theoretically, you can imagine if these trees would run, that's where they would run. But that's just temperature. They would still be overwhelmed by the extreme weather, the droughts, the rain, the invasive, the destructive insect infestation. So, letting forests burn and letting regeneration of maybe migrating new species is plausible and is happening. But it's just, after a while, it's hard to imagine any of our trees adapting fast enough to what's happening. It's just we've got to keep the planet from going much past 1.5 C. That's just the only option.
Yeah. Okay, maybe just one or two more if you have a few more minutes, Mike.
I don't
Ray,
know. I'm a football fan. I'm guessing there aren't many football fans here. I'm literally keeping track of my Washington Commanders versus the New York Giants. So how about one more?
okay, that sounds good. Well, then we'll close with a comment, and it's from Kathy. Instead of a question, Kathy says, I want to express my gratitude for all your climate work and also for writing a book about climate change from a narrative, local, non-scientist point of view. Hopefully, you will start a trend where we'll see many more books describing different local effects of climate change. It makes me think of my 7-year-old niece who, when we drove over the Rio Grande on a bridge in Albuquerque, New Mexico, recently said, the river is dry. That's scary. As you noted, every local community on the planet has a book-length climate change story to tell. So thank you very
Uh,
much.
that's a wonderful comment. I truly appreciate it. That is certainly my goal, is to get people to realize climate change is not just a far away phenomenon that affects other people or farther in the future, affecting future people. It's affecting us now, right where we live. And I will also say, for anyone who winds up reading the book, or if you have read the book or listened to it on Audible, one way to help other people find the book is to leave a review on Amazon or Goodreads. Rate the book, leave a short review, even if it's just 2 sentences. It really helps the algorithm to help people looking for books about trees or climate change to find this title. So that would be one favor I would ask of everyone on this call.
Great. Okay, we will do that. So thank you again, Mike, for speaking with us today and furthering our climate education with your personal stories and your education. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
At MEER, we're working to help educate the public while also developing technologies to help curb the warming on our planet. We invite you to keep learning about Earth's energy imbalance and climate science on our website. We're primarily a volunteer staff, so please consider making a monthly donation of any amount if you've enjoyed being here or watching or have been watching our MEER Talks on YouTube, which is where you can find anything from the past if you're looking to catch up. You can also check us out on social media, and by all means, tell somebody else what you learned, what you heard on MEER Talk. We hope to see you all again on October 5th for our next MEER Talk, which will be Robert Hunziker, and that will be our guest. Thanks so much for coming, everybody. Take care.